Good afternoon, all. My name is Sam McGill. I am a facilitator with Sacramento State University's Consensus and Collaboration program. I've been assisting the Petaluma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency with facilitation of their advisory committee for the last several months. We're really excited to have you here today for the first in a while, GSA community meeting. You've probably all noticed that your lines are muted. I have a few just real basic instructions up on the screen here that I wanted to run through before I turn it over to the GSA chairman, David Rabbit, for some opening remarks. One thing to note, we would ask that you refrain from using your video feed unless you have a specific speaking role. So that's kind of limited directly to staff at this point. But I know Chairman Rabbit wanted to make sure that all of you could see him as he delivers his opening remarks. As I mentioned, your lines will be muted throughout the meeting today until specific Q&A periods. Once we begin that question and answer, we would really love if you could all join the conversation queue by using the hand raise feature in Zoom. You can access the little hand raise feature by clicking on the participants button in your Zoom controls, and that will enter you into the queue. Whether we're in kind of the larger plenary group or our individual breakouts, the facilitator for those breakout sessions, and I'll explain that in a moment, will unmute each line as questions arise. So seeing that we have a good number of folks here, I do want to just go ahead and jump right into it. So I know Chairman Rabbit had some introductory remarks he wanted to make. So I'd like to go ahead and unmute him at this time and turn it over to him. Oh, I'm sorry, David. Let me unmute you here. Just a moment.
Am I good?
Yep. Yeah, we got you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Very much appreciate your facilitation tonight. And welcome everyone to this Petaluma Valley Groundwater Sustainability outreach that we're trying to do. We'd like to obviously be doing this in person, but now's not the time to hold those types of meetings. And this is the next best thing we can do. So thank you again for your patience and for joining us tonight. You know that it is so important that we really the state some years ago dictated that every groundwater basin be managed for sustainability. I think we'd all agree that's a smart move. Ultimately, we here in California, we were one of the last states to really kind of come in to deal with our groundwater in that way. And I'm sure you've all read about the different groundwater problems, primarily in the Central Valley. Here in Sonoma County, we have a lot of different groundwater aquifers, and we'll get some information on that later from the experts. We have some issues in certain areas for different reasons. We have saltwater intrusion for those areas around the bay. We have some areas of depletion and where there's over-concentration. We have other groundwater and surface water interactions. And we really want to make sure that we can provide the best science going forward to protect our groundwater and protect ultimately the drinking water for those who rely on it. So we've been working fast and furious for a couple of years now through the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And the Groundwater Sustainability Agency for the Petaluma Valley area consists of myself as chair, Susan Gorin, my colleague, who I see is on the line here, Bruce Abelli-Amon, and Carolyn Wassam, and Mike Healy. And so we've been leading staff in policy debates and questions as we kind of get through the early stages of putting together the plan. Ultimately, the plan will be adopted and measures will be brought forward to address any deficiencies that the plan shows, so that we can make sure, again, that we have this sustainable water system and clean drinking water system for our entire community. So I just want to say thank you again to Sam. Thank you very much to Ann Dubé. She is our administrator that keeps us all on track and keeps the work flowing. Andrea Rodriguez, Jay Jaspers, and Marcus Trotta are two subject matter experts, par none, and we're lucky to have them working on not just this groundwater area here in Petaluma, but all three that we're working on now in Sonoma County. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Sam, or are we going straight to Marcus?
Yes, thank you very much, David. Since Susan has joined us as well, I want to give her the opportunity just to welcome participants, and thank you, Susan, for joining us.
Thank you. I'm still trying to figure out the mute and unmute. I'm so grateful to everyone who organized the sustainability workshop tonight. All of the information that we'll be talking about is absolutely essential. And thank our chair, David Rabbit, for really describing why groundwater is so important to the future of not only Petaluma Valley, but Sonoma Valley and the Santa Rosa Basin. So working together, take it away. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susan. And I know that we have one additional board member on as well, Mike Healy. So let me just scroll up to Mike and see if he wanted to address the group as well. One moment. All right. Mike, anything that you wanted to share with the group?
You know, I think David and Susan have covered it well, so I don't need to add anything more. I'm pleased we're doing this. It's nice to be dealing with a normal issue in these times, and this is a very important normal issue. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you again, everybody, for joining. I'm seeing just a couple of questions popping up in the chat feed. You will notice that your mute and unmute are disabled for this. We do that in these large community meetings just to sort of minimize the amount of distractions in the background. Once we get to the Q&A portion, I will kind of explain what we're going to do for that. But until that time, I would ask that everybody keeps their phones muted. Additionally, as I said, you're welcome to use the video feed if you like, but I really would encourage people to disable that throughout the presentations just so we can really remain focused on all of the great material that you'll hear today. We're on a very tight schedule today. Our goal is to get you out of here by 7 p.m. I'm going to run through the agenda just real quickly and then turn it over to Marcus Trotta from Sonoma Water to provide a background presentation and some context on the Petaluma Valley Groundwater Basin. We'll break for just a few minutes for clarifying questions after Marcus's presentation, and then jump directly into an additional presentation that will focus on defining groundwater sustainability. So you heard from many members of the GSA board the importance of this issue, but what does sustainability really look like, and what does it mean in the context of the Petaluma Valley? Ann Dubé, the GSA administrator for the Petaluma Valley GSA, and staff from Sonoma Water will provide that background information. And then again, we'll break for questions that you may have. Really, the focus of the day, though, is going to be a breakout group exercise. We have a great number of participants today. I think including staff, we're up to 33, so that's really exciting. But we're going to have a breakout group exercise to discuss a little bit about what sustainability means to all of you. We have a couple members of the advisory committee who have very graciously offered to help facilitate those discussions. And then I'll be kind of in the background throughout the day, just hoping to get everything running smoothly here. I don't want to take up any more time, though. I am conscious that we don't have a ton of time this afternoon. So I do want to go ahead and hand it over to Marcus Trotta for his presentation, again, on the groundwater basin itself. So let me unmute Marcus here and get his presentation loaded up, if you'll bear with me for just a moment. Oop. All right, Marcus, just one moment. I'll get your presentation fired up here. All right, wonderful. So hopefully folks should be seeing the first slide on that. Marcus, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you, Sam, and thanks everybody for joining this evening to hear about groundwater in Petaluma Valley. Again, my name is Marcus Trotta. I'm a hydrogeologist with Sonoma Water, And my work there is focused on kind of helping to lead the development of a groundwater sustainability plan for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency that's due in about a year and a half now. So as Chairman Rabbit noted, we've been very busy over the past couple years, and I'm going to give you a little preview of some of the work that we've been doing, and I think Ann's going to talk about work that's ahead of us. So just jumping right in here. If you live in the Petaluma Valley, from San Pablo Bay to Pengrove, and from West Petaluma to Sonoma Mountain, you live in the Petaluma Valley Groundwater Basin. The purpose of this presentation is to briefly describe a new law that requires Californians to manage their groundwater, to describe the features of the basin we live in, including its geology and groundwater features. This information provides a foundation for understanding how our basin must comply with that new law. The shape and boundaries of the basin are defined by the state of California, the Department of Water Resources of the state of California, based on geological and other characteristics like rivers and city boundaries. The Petaluma Valley Basin includes the valley floor and is bordered by the low-lying hills on the west and Sonoma Mountain on the east. This map shows the basin area in blue dots and the watershed that contributes to the basin in a solid gray line. Groundwater management through the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, or GSA, only applies to those areas that are within that dotted blue line. For the purpose of the plan, we are also looking at and including data from that other area surrounding the basin, the contributing watershed area, because they do represent important sources of inflow to the basin and are connected to the basin. But the GSA's management area is just within the dotted blue line. So in Sonoma County, there are 14 state-designated groundwater basins and subbasins, and only 3 of those, Petaluma Valley, Santa Rosa Plain, and Sonoma Valley, are currently required to comply with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, which became law in 2015. Petaluma Valley, Santa Rosa Plain, and Sonoma Valley are complying with SGMA by having created groundwater sustainability agencies, which are governed each by a board of directors made up primarily of elected officials. These GSA boards receive input from diverse stakeholder-based advisory committees. Each GSA board has its own advisory committee, one in each of those 3 basins. Currently, the 3 basins, as I mentioned, are now working on the second step of compliance, which is to develop these groundwater sustainability plans, or GSPs. These plans explain the basin conditions, identify problems or potential future problems with groundwater, and will outline any projects and actions that may be needed to correct or prevent any future problems. Sonoma County GSAs are each independent agencies, but coordinate with local cities and the county to leverage resources and promote efficiencies. The goal of SGMA and the plans are to ensure that groundwater is available today and into the future for all users, including rural residents, farmers, businesses, and the environment. To date, draft sections 1 and 2 of the plan have been completed, and most of section 3 is complete. In 2020, staff is working to finish sections 3 and 4 of the plan, and the full final draft will be released in fall of 2021. And section 3 of the plan, kind of shown in circle here, is a basin and an aquifer description, is what we'll be focusing on today. This presentation highlights information that is provided in detail in the draft first 3 sections of the plan. These sections describe the basin and groundwater conditions. This presentation covers only the key findings. If you want to dive into the details, I encourage you to go to the web link that's shown on the bottom left of this slide, petalumavalleygroundwater.org, to download and read the full drafts of those current sections and to see all of the figures that we'll be sharing here today in more detail if you'd like. Most of the upper portions of the Petaluma Valley Basin are between sea level and an elevation of about 50 feet, while the lower portions primarily consist of tidal marshlands located at or slightly below sea level. Petaluma is the only city in the basin. Other communities include Pengrove and the Lakeville area. The basin includes multiple parks and open space, with a key feature being those tidal marshlands. Again, looking at the areas within the blue basin boundary, I think we need to go to the next slide. Looking at the areas within the blue basin boundary, 57% of the basin, shown in very light green on this map, is water or native vegetation of the tidal marshlands. Agriculture, shown in darker green and orange, represents about 23% of the land use, and commercial and industrial land uses compose about 16% of the basin's area, shown in the brown color. Much of the more recently developed irrigated agricultural land in the basin is planted in grapevines, shown mostly in the eastern part of the basin, defined by those pink areas. Other major agricultural uses include hay fields, with the majority of those located in the southern and along some of the central portions of the basin, shown in kind of the yellow-greenish color on this map. The Petaluma River, which is tidally influenced from downtown Petaluma to its mouth at San Pablo Bay, is a major stream draining into the basin. In this figure, the river is that solid blue line running south to north through the basin. For some people in the basin, the Petaluma River or its tributaries can represent an important local source of water. The city of Petaluma, shown in yellow, primarily relies on surface water imported into the basin by Sonoma Water from the Russian River system. But it does use groundwater for emergency purposes and has a well field, which is also used as a backup supply. It's a very important backup supply for the city. Another important source of water in the basin is recycled water, which is treated to tertiary standards by the city of Petaluma at their wastewater treatment plant, and is used for crop and landscape irrigation, and can represent a valuable resource that can offset the use of potable water supplies, including groundwater. The brown, reddish brown, and light orange areas that are outside of the city limits illustrate where locations of residents and farmers that rely primarily on groundwater in the basin. The reliance on groundwater is also illustrated in this map, which shows the density of water supply wells in the basin. The areas with the highest number of wells per square mile are shown in gold colors and yellowish colors, and primarily occur north of Petaluma and in the basin, and also just outside of the basin in the northwestern portions of the map. The gray and darker blue areas show the lowest numbers of wells per square miles, and the shades of greenish kind of show the middle ranges on this map. With so many people and farmers in the environment relying on groundwater, it's important to understand the health of our groundwater system. Because we can't physically see what's happening underground, we use monitoring wells as our eyes on the basin. By checking water levels in these wells over time, a picture can begin to emerge of our basin. This photo shows the installation of a shallow monitoring well near a creek that was recently conducted due to some funding that the GSA was able to obtain from the state to help improve our monitoring network. By measuring the level of groundwater in the well while simultaneously measuring the levels of water in the creek, we can gain an understanding about the relationship between groundwater and surface water in this area, which is going to be very important for us as we develop our groundwater sustainability plan, having an understanding of that surface water and groundwater connection. So what is the groundwater picture in Petaluma Valley Basin? Fortunately, several years ago, the Sonoma Water and the city of Petaluma partnered with the federal scientists at the U.S. Geological Survey to help fund about $1 million study of the groundwater basin, which also includes the development of a computer model to help us understand and serve as a tool for us to make future projections of groundwater conditions in the basin. Section 3 of the plan that's available on that website includes some of the preliminary information from that study, which is due to be published sometime later this year. This presentation is going to focus on the following components of Section 3, which draw from that USGS study. That includes the hydrogeologic conceptual model and current and historical groundwater conditions. These are specific subsections in that draft plan that's on the website, Section 3. The hydrogeologic conceptual model simply characterizes the physical processes that control the distribution, occurrence, and movement of surface water and groundwater systems in the basin, including regional weather patterns, hydrology, geology, water quality, and characterization of the principal aquifer system in the basin. We live in a Mediterranean climate, with about 95% of our rainfall occurring between October and May, and much of that rainfall coming in typically 3 or 4 major storms, particularly atmospheric rivers. While the average annual rainfall in the basin itself ranges from about 27 to 42 inches annually, shown in these green and yellow shades, the larger watershed outside that dotted blue line has higher average rainfall and helps contribute to our groundwater basin, as rainfall is typically higher in higher elevation areas. The types of soil in an area can define how quickly water infiltrates from the surface into the aquifer, which is an important parameter for us to understand as to how the groundwater basin gets recharged each year. Gravelly and sandy soils, shown in yellows and golds, like those found in the low hills at the very northern part of the basin, allow for more infiltration than clayey soils, shown in reds and purples, found throughout actually much of the area of the basin. This map, which shows the hydraulic conductivity of the basin, which is an indicator of how quickly water moves through those soils, illustrates that the conductivity of most of the basin in oranges is relatively low, between 0.1 to 4 feet per day, while those at the top of the basin are moderate, between about 1 to 4 feet per day. Only a few areas within the blue basin boundaries are green, which indicate higher conductivity levels. The Petaluma Valley is located within a region of geologic complexity caused by long periods of active tectonic deformation, volcanic activity, and sea level changes. We've had a lot of different geologic events that have helped shape our basin. This next figure from the U.S. Geological Survey's draft report shows a kind of a cross section of the basin, with Sonoma Mountain areas on the right and the low-lying hills of the western part of the valley on the left. Most geologists like to put together puzzles, and that's probably why this diagram looks somewhat like a jigsaw puzzle. But I'll kind of describe some of these different formations, starting actually from the bottom, which represent the oldest or basement rocks. These are Mesozoic in age, over 66 million years old, primarily the Franciscan Formation, which essentially serves as a impermeable bottom layer throughout much of the basin. The next oldest piece of the puzzle are the Tolle volcanics. Sorry, if you could just go back to that preview, thank you. The next oldest pieces of the puzzle are the Tolle volcanics and the Sonoma volcanics, with the Tolle volcanics shown in the rust color and Sonoma volcanics shown in the orange color, ranging between 2.5 to about a little over 8 million years old. The amount of groundwater and how successful wells produce water from this formation is highly variable, as the formation often is highly fractured because it's so old. The Petaluma Formation, shown in brown, and namesake of the basin, is approximately 5 million years old and is characterized by having a pretty high content of both silts and clays. So its groundwater production can be fairly limited in some areas unless you happen to penetrate some sand and gravel zones in it. The Wilson Grove Formation, kind of that yellowish puzzle piece, is slightly younger than the Petaluma Formation and is characterized by sandstone and has a moderate to high permeability, which results in fairly good yields to water wells and large contributions to the groundwater basin. The thinner yellowish layer near the top of the basin and the pink layers represent some of the youngest deposits in the basin, known as quaternary alluvial deposits, and with the pink units being recently mapped units discovered by the USGS as mixed units. Finally, on the very top, there are the quaternary bay muds, which occur in the tidal marshlands area that were left by a much higher sea level near San Pablo Bay. So the principal aquifer system consists primarily of that Petaluma and Wilson Grove Formation, Sonoma volcanics, that quaternary mixed unit, and to a lesser degree those alluvial deposits. Fault lines, especially the Petaluma Valley and Meacham Hill faults, strongly control how the aquifer units are distributed, their depth, and how they're connected. And they're important to understanding our basin. Groundwater recharge occurs mostly from infiltration from rains and streams, seepage from the Petaluma River and its tributaries, and from mountain front recharge along the edges of the valley. Other sources can include over-irrigation, inflow from San Pablo Bay and saltwater marshes. Most of this recharge goes into the shallow aquifer system. Inflow from adjoining basins can also be an important source of recharge to the basin. Where groundwater resurfaces in the basin, this is known as groundwater discharge, and occurs primarily through creeks, streams, and springs in areas of Sonoma Mountain, seeps, interconnected wetlands, deep-rooted plants that can reach and use groundwater for their water needs, and at water wells where it is brought to the surface by pumps. Groundwater can also be exchanged underground with neighboring basins where they are connected, such as with the Santa Rosa Plain Basin to the north. Additionally, groundwater also generally flows into the basin from the northwestern boundary with the Wilson Grove and from its eastern boundary with the Sonoma volcanics. So now that we have a kind of a basic understanding of the geology, soils, faults, and other characteristics of the basin, we're going to address the question of what is happening in groundwater levels. Are they increasing, decreasing, staying about the same? Those monitoring wells we discussed earlier provide information about both short-term and long-term trends in groundwater levels. However, because of the geologic complexity of our basin and the variability of the monitoring wells themselves, the trends shouldn't necessarily be used to interpret what's happening in your specific neighborhood. The majority of groundwater level changes over time, known as hydrographs, indicate the groundwater levels are relatively stable with seasonal fluctuations. levels in the wells being higher in the spring and lower in the fall. This close-up of the northern part of the basin, near North Petaluma and Pengrove, shows the hydrographs of both shallow and deeper monitoring wells. You can see that the lines in some of the hydrographs fluctuate, but are generally stable over time. Locally, we do observe some decreasing trends over time, which have been observed just along or slightly outside both the northern and eastern edges of the basin, which will be areas that'll need to be investigated as part of this GSP. Moving on to land subsidence, which is another criteria that needs to be considered with this plan. This is a photo, actually, fortunately not from Petaluma Valley. This is taken from California's Central Valley, showing land surface subsidence in the San Joaquin, the southern portions of that area. Showing how the land has sunk or subsided due to groundwater pumping. Groundwater pumping can cause the aquifer system to collapse in certain conditions. Analysis of the Petaluma Valley Basin to date finds that while the ground surface does slightly rise and fall each year due to seasonal changes in water content known as hydrologic isostatic loading, recent data that is available doesn't find any evidence of any land subsidence that has been caused by groundwater pumping or declining groundwater levels in the basin. The final thing I'll cover is in this presentation is groundwater quality. Groundwater quality in the basin is generally acceptable for beneficial uses. However, in some local areas of the basin, groundwater quality can be poor, primarily related to the brackish waters of San Pablo Bay and those tidal marshlands, some deep, older water associated with the ancient water that's trapped in some of the deeper rock formations and sediments in the basin. And human-caused concerns, land use issues can also cause some local water quality problems, including nitrates. Locally, naturally occurring constituents of concern generally include arsenic, boron, and total dissolved solids, including chloride. Arsenic is one that occurs naturally in certain geologic areas. It is a toxic mineral and is considered carcinogenic. A draft study underway by the U.S. Geological Survey found that about 49 wells sampled for arsenic, about 7 or 14% exceeded recommended thresholds. And so for those wells, some type of treatment is generally required for drinking water purposes. Boron is also another naturally occurring constituent that occurs in groundwaters due to the different types of rocks and sediments. And in small amounts is actually necessary for human health, but at higher levels it can be toxic to plants and can locally pose problems for agricultural irrigation. The draft USGS report found that of 29 samples analyzed for boron, only one had levels that were higher than those recommended by the state. Chlorides or salts can also be found in groundwater through natural leaching from rocks, as well as from human activities such as manufacturing, wastewater treatment plants, landfills, and is also an indicator of seawater intrusion. Of 63 wells tested for chlorides, about 7 exceeded the recommended maximum contaminant level. And the wells with the highest levels of chlorides and salts were generally in the southern portions of the basin, where groundwater is influenced by those tidal marshlands near San Pablo Bay, where brackish water naturally exists. In the northern part of the basin's wells with higher chlorides or dissolved solids are generally those getting water from a geologic formation known as the Quaternary Mixed Unit. Nitrate is also commonly associated with farming, septic systems, and wastewater discharges. And elevated levels of nitrate in drinking water are considered to be especially unhealthy for infants and pregnant women. And in fact, historically, high levels of nitrate were found in the northwestern portions of the basin or just outside the basin, and prompted the county back in the 1980s to establish special requirements for water wells in that area to seal off that shallow contaminated portions of the aquifer system. The recent USGS study, which sampled the compiled data from about 60 wells throughout the basin, found a much better picture basin-wide for nitrate that may be the result of some of those activities sealing off those prior shallow contaminated aquifer systems, and only found one sample that exceeded the maximum contaminant level. So moving on to other portions of section 3 of the plan, we will be including information on creeks, streams, and other water bodies that are interconnected with groundwater, in a discussion of plant and animal communities that are dependent on groundwater, known as groundwater dependent ecosystems. We also have a work group that is just formed to focus on what and where groundwater dependent ecosystems occur in all 3 basins, and we're tapping into local experts and practitioners that have familiarity with biological conditions and species in our basins. So the final piece of section 3 is still in production and will rely on information from this forthcoming USGS study, which is the water budget. And you can think of this kind of like a checkbook for your groundwater system. It essentially tells us how much water is coming into the basin annually and how much groundwater is leaving the basin. We're currently in the process of taking information from the USGS study and the model that they're developing and making it specific to our basin area to develop this water budget. Because we also need to include a projected water budget out 50 years, we've tapped into some local experts that are helping us develop estimates for future water demands, particularly in the agricultural areas of the basin, as well as the rural residential potential for growth in the basin, so that we can include that in our projections for future groundwater use, in addition to information that'll come from the city of Petaluma's work on their urban water management plan, which is also ongoing. All this work will inform the water budget and will be something that we'll be sharing with the advisory committee later this year. So in summary, Petaluma Valley Basin is characterized by many groundwater wells that are located outside of the urban areas that support residents, farming, and businesses. High level of geologic complexity, highly variable groundwater availability based on the specific geologic formations that are dispersed throughout the basin. An aquifer system with 4 main types of aquifer units. Generally stable groundwater levels overall, no evidence of permanent or inelastic land surface subsidence, and highly variable water quality issues with some localized water quality issues. So with that, I think I am happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Marcus. So just as a quick reminder to folks, we will take about 5 minutes of kind of clarifying questions here. This isn't there will be time for actual breakout sessions and some more in-depth discussion after these introductory presentations. But I do want to give folks the opportunity to chime in with any clarifying questions. I noticed that there are a couple in the chat here that I'll just read out. Nicole Warwick asks whether we are testing for pesticide contamination in groundwater, and if not, how do we go about establishing testing? So I'll hand that off to Marcus in just a moment, but there are a fairly wide variety of agencies that routinely test for groundwater contamination, particularly in drinking water. As that applies to Sigma, though, I want to get some input from Marcus. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. That's correct. There are a number of other regulatory agencies that are responsible for managing and regulating water quality in the basins. The GSAs will have a role related to water quality as well. And as part of what Ann will be describing next, we'll be developing sustainable management criteria that will need to incorporate water quality. For things like pesticides, in addition to those regulatory agencies, there are special studies that have been done by the USGS and others that the GSA will include information on in the groundwater sustainability plan on water quality conditions and be tracking those conditions over time. But in terms of what specific constituents the GSA would be including in their specific criteria they need to include, that's something that we'll be working with the advisory committee as well as the GSA board over the next probably 6 months or so.
Great, thanks, Marcus. All right, let me see if there's any other questions that folks would like to ask. Again, we're kind of focused on clarifying questions at this point. Go ahead and use that hand raise feature in your Zoom controls. You can find that by clicking on the participants button, and then there's a little hand at the bottom. Go ahead and click on that if you have a clarifying question that you'd like to ask Marcus about any of the material that was just presented. While folks are figuring out that, John Shribs, a member of the Petaluma Valley Advisory Committee, notes that the Watershed Enhancement Plan is being updated. There is a groundwater section in an old document that said groundwater was having salt intrusion issues prior to 1950. So that's, around the time of the inception of Sonoma Water itself. And he finally asks, do we have documentation of this prior to 1950? I don't know if you have any, if there's anything you wanted to add to that, Marcus?
Yeah, I think that is kind of commonly understood that prior to Sonoma Water's aqueduct being extended to the city of Petaluma, they did pump a lot more groundwater than currently. And there are reports of historical issues with saltwater intrusion in the southern portions of the basin, which have been reversed since the Western River was brought in and groundwater pumping was reduced.
Great, thank you. All right, any other questions from members of the public, any of the folks joining us online? Again, you can just use that little hand raise function, or feel free to type your question into the chat. As a reminder, we'll break for kind of more in-depth discussion amongst all of you shortly here. Okay. Well, at this time, thank you very much for that introductory presentation, Marcus. I know that was a lot of information for folks to absorb, but it really gives some important context on sort of the heart of the discussion that we want to get to. And that's really what sustainability means for the Petaluma Valley Basin.